All right, fellow coders, in this one, we're going to be modifying this view to allow us to actually update the assignment to, not assignment to, but the assignment domain object page or view such that it's in sync with our database and so on and so forth with React. So if that sounds like it is of interest to you, stick around. All right, fellow coder, let's dive into this juicy code. So in order to get started with hooking these guys up to our database, essentially, it's going to require a sort of two-step process. The first step of the process is going to be to hook up these inputs, so the GitHub URL and the branch, inputs, hook them up such that they are being tracked with state inside of React. And then the second step is that we will need to have some sort of process of saving that data when we want to. So let's first start with being able to track these variables. So the first one is the GitHub URL and set GitHub URL. And we will use this as useState, or track it as useState. It will be initialized as empty, and then we will do the same thing for the branch and set branch. useState, it will be initialized as blank, okay? So then with these guys, we want to be able to hook up our inputs such that when they change, we want to set the value of the GitHub URL with something, and the something is the event. So the event, as we talked about in a past video, we talked about the on change and passing in the event. The event has a target. The target is where the event is occurring, so the element that the event is occurring inside of. In this case, the target is going to be the input. So the e.target will resolve to be the input element. And when you have an input element, you can say .value to get the value of the input element text, so to speak. Okay, so now that will hook it up with the GitHub URL variable up here that we just created. So as we type in data into GitHub URL, it will actually update, or rather in the GitHub URL input here, it will update this GitHub URL value. Okay. Or I should say a variable, the value of the variable. And same for branch, right? We can say on change, set this equal to e, and set branch equal to e.target.value. Save that, and hopefully that does not bring up any errors. The render method for more information. Oh, right, I missed this error before right. So this is we'll come back to that. We'll circle back. So as we type stuff in here, it will be updating those two variables separately. So that's great because now those variables are being updated with information. Now, if we want to take this one step further, we might be interested to keep the assignment object itself, the assignment variable itself, which was pulled from the database. We might want to keep that updated, right? So a slightly better approach here, while this is totally the standard approach and acceptable, you would have a whole bunch of these values or variables that we would be tracking. Another way to do it is just to straight up link it up with the assignment object that's coming from the server side, right? So yeah, that's potentially how we can do it. Now there's a bunch of different ways to do this. We can do it such that we update the assignment's GitHub URL as the GitHub URL variable changes, but then you have sort of two different variables representing the same thing, and that can get a bit confusing. So maybe instead of having these, we hook it up to the assignment itself. Now this could be tricky because there's no setter method to do this. Let me just think of how I might do this. So you might say set assignment, right? And then the assignment needs to be updated by grabbing the assignment's GitHub URL property and updating that with a target value, right? So maybe we want to create a method that does all this for us, sort of an update assignment method, right? So how about we do this? We'll create a function called update assignment, okay? And then we will need to know the property that we are going to be updating, right? So that's sort of the is that going to work? It might work. The property that we're updating. I think there's a way to do that. So essentially the name of the property. And I believe there's a way to get access to the name of the property by saying assignment at property equals, and then you can pass in the value and set that equal to the value, right? Let's just see if this works. And we'll have a look at, and then we'll have a log to output the value of assignment just to see if it actually works. Okay, so we'll update the assignment. So instead of saying set GitHub URL, we'll say update assignment. We'll pass in the name of the property, which is, in this case, GitHub URL. And then the value is going to be e.target.value. Now let me make sure GitHub URL is actually what's on the assignment. Let me hop over to the assignment domain object. Oh, it's GitHub URL with a lowercase h. Very important. GitHub URL lowercase h, whereas the ID here is uppercase, but we should probably make that lowercase as well, just to keep everything in sync. So if we come over here and start to delete stuff, let's go into the console and see what's being updated. So when we say boom, so we have something printed out to the console. As soon as I hit backspace, it printed out the assignment object. You see branch, code review, whatever. But look, GitHub URL is equal to AASDFA, which is actually what's in here. So as I type in the GitHub URL, http://www.github.com/ something. As I'm typing that in, you see that the object gets updated, and here it is, right? So the object itself has that value. In my opinion, this is more powerful than setting up a bunch of separate variables to track all this stuff, because now we don't need this. We don't need the GitHub URL because we're literally updating it on the assignment object itself. So same thing for branch. Let's delete the branch, and let's go here and say instead update assignment, right? What is the name of the key is branch, and then e.target.getValue, right? So let's come in here and say test1, and then this one could be test2. So now is the branch set to test2? Yes, it is. And is the GitHub URL set to test1? Yes, it is. So from a view and a React perspective, we're done. We're good. We've now kept everything in sync with this assignment object, but we need to then make sure that we update the database. So that's when you click on submit assignment. So on a submit assignment, we want to be able to actually send this data to the back end. So how do we do that? Well, we can have a function called, let's see. Well, actually, how about this? When we, I was gonna say, how about when we update the assignment, we also update the database. But that might get a bit too crazy because as you type every keystroke, this update assignment is being changed. So that's not the greatest. That would be too many calls to the database. Maybe we'll say function save, okay? And then that can call a fetch, and the fetch will be the endpoint of /API/assignments/ the assignment ID, which means I need to use backticks. So the assignment ID. And what I'm going to follow here is proper convention with respect to APIs with CRUD. When you post to a URL with, the domain object name, which is assignments, and then the ID, it means that you want to update that particular assignment. Post or put. You can do a put as well, and that's probably the better way to do it. But anyway, let's create the header. Again, I need to refactor this. Header and method. The method will be, should I do put or post? I mean, put is kind of what we do for update, so I'll do a put. And then we will need a body. So we need to send it something to update with, right? So this will be the stringified version of our assignment object that we were just updating here, okay? So that will allow us to save our data. Response. Oh, if status is, or not status, sorry, if response.status is 200, then we want to return the response.json. We'll wrap all this in curly brackets, and then we'll have the assignment data back. And basically we can set back into assignments the assignment data. Just in case anything else changed, we want to make sure that our view is in sync with our database. Okay, so that's more or less what the save function will do, and we will call that save function when we click this button. So on click, we will call the save function. Okay, now if I click on submit assignment right now, it's going to give me an error, and the error is going to be that it doesn't know what the heck the put is, because we haven't set that method up for that endpoint. So we need to set up on the back end the assignment controller. We need to have a for this endpoint, for the assignment ID endpoint, we need to have a put mapping. So put mapping for the assignment ID endpoint. Basically, we need to do the same thing as this. Let me copy paste. So we need to, this is not get assignments, but this is update assignment. And this is really just get assignment, by the way, because it's a single assignment that we're getting. And like so. So we essentially need to update with the data that we're getting from the front end. So the data that we're getting from the front end is what? We are getting the request body. Because remember that in the put request, we're sending a request body, which should be a representation of the assignment domain object, right? So the request body is the assignment. And then with this assignment, we should be able to say assignment service.save, right? Do we have a save method? Yes. Wait, we need to save with a user. I see. This is what we use to create one. So in this case, we can pass in an assignment, and that will be a different endpoint or a different method. So we'll create a new one that accepts an assignment. And basically what this one does is when you pass in just a user, this assumes you're creating a brand new assignment, and this save will assume that you're just updating an assignment, right? So we'll say assignment repo dot save assignment, and we will return that assignment back, right? Because we want to return that back to the controller, or back to the service, which then returns, from the service, it returns back to the controller, and then we can use that and assign it to a variable. We'll call this, updated assignment. And then we can say return the response entity, just like we did above, and entity.ok, and the body of this is going to be the updated assignment. Okay, so just like we did up here, we returned, well, sort of. This one was an optional. This one's not optional. We have an assignment, and we're just updating it. So let's reboot our server, because we changed some Java. Anytime we change Java, we need to reboot our server, and that's done. So now let's come back to the front end code and whatnot, and let me refresh the screen here. So everything is still empty. So let me do, github.com/something, and the branch will say is main. Now when I say submit assignment, it should take this data, it should be populated inside of the assignment variable here. And then when I click on the button submit assignment, it should execute the save and stringify that assignment variable. So it should stringify it and send it as application JSON to the endpoint, which will then receive it and save it in our database. I can't guarantee this will work, but let's see what happens. Okay, so internal server error, that's kind of expected. Let's see what the error is on the server side. Anytime you see 500 error, it means there was an issue in your Java side of stuff. So binding, cannot construct instance of granted authority, blah, 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 blah. So there is an issue with the authorities in here. So we're missing data, essentially, is what's happening here, I think. Don't quote me on that, but let's reboot the server in debug mode and see what assignment object we have. Let's go back here, refresh, repopulate the data with branch, or sorry, main is what I chose, and say submit. That should hit our breakpoint. Oh, it didn't hit my breakpoint. Did I not put mapping? Oh, is this before? This is a binding exception. Sorry. So it doesn't even get into this method yet. It hasn't even tried to save. It just can't bind the data to the object. So this request body assignment doesn't work. Okay, so this is where the annoying stuff happens. So cannot construct instance of granted authority. No creators like default constructor exist. Abstract types either need to be mapped to concrete types, have a deserializer, blah, blah, blah. So the issue is Coders Campus assignment submission domain user authorities array list. So it looks like, I'm assuming it's the request body, but it's talking about the user. So, and through reference chain assignment domain, oh, here we go, assignment and then user. So yeah, there's an issue with mapping the user to the assignment, and it's having trouble with that. So let me think. So the first thing that comes to mind is, well, this data type is not exactly perfect for here, for this request body, because the assignment has this user object. One thing I might be able to do is to say, I was going to say JSON ignore it. So just ignore it from a JSON perspective, which might fix our problem, but then it might cause another one if we're ignoring it with JSON and then assignments never have users. That, yeah, maybe that's not the greatest solution. So in my mind, the easiest go-to solution here is to have a DTO. Okay, a DTO is a way to map out a subset, essentially, or a sort of subset of your domain objects, right? So basically, we're struggling with assigning the user or binding the user here because we're not sending the user as a part of the request from the front end. So when we send the assignment object, and I can probably show you in the network tab, if I expand this, where this 500 exception happened, if I go into the 500 exception and pull this up, the payload, which is the request payload, which is what I'm sending to the server side, this is what we're sending, right? Oh, but we are sending the user. So the user is part of this conversation, but authorities, interesting. The authorities has null for the ID, which is probably why this problem is happening. So why does the authority, it says role student, which is great, but why is the ID null? That's actually kind of interesting. So I didn't realize we had the user there already. So there's two problems, or two ways to solve this. I didn't realize that the user was there. That's great. We have the user. So we could solve for why the authority's ID is blank. But is that what it's complaining about? Let me just double check. What are we solving for? Domain assignment user authorities. Root cause says the granted authority cannot construct instance granted authority. So it cannot construct a granted authority because granted authority is an interface. So it says, no creators like default constructor, whatever exist, which is true because it's a granted authority is from Spring and it's an interface. So the granted authority as a part of the user authorities. So the user authorities. Oh, interesting, because we don't have it here. It's not mapped there, so it doesn't know what to do. But I believe... Oh, but we have a get authorities. Is that just the problem? Do we just need to have this here? Let me terminate. And we have a get authorities, but we probably need to have a set authorities as well. Is that all we need to do? But what that does to get authorities is, that's the problem. We're not, this is not hitting the database. this is not hitting the database, which is interesting. That's why it doesn't have an ID, right? This doesn't have an ID because we're not using the database. Interesting. Return roles, or rather return authorities, because authorities comes from, oh, but we didn't map it. I see. We didn't map it with a we don't have a relationship here set up. So we'd have to set up a one-to-many mapping, and say, yeah, I think the fetch type is automatically set to eager with one-to-many. Is that true? It might be. Mapped by what, user? Oops. So in the authority table, how do we map the user? It's called user, so that's where that mapped by came from. So we need to set the mapped by, I believe, for this to work properly. So let me reboot and see if that makes a difference. First, we'll see if it fails to boot. Okay, good. It didn't fail to boot. And then let's go back in here, refresh, clear this stuff. Unauthorized. Oh, right. Okay, of course. So the user here, sorry for the white screen now. It hurts my eyes too. Our user and our authority, oh, it is mapped. So it does have a role student here. And okay, so it does that is mapped correctly. So why are we unauthorized now? Failed to lazily initiate the collection. Okay, so what we could do is make this eager. I thought it was eager by default, but I could be wrong. I forget what if one-to-many is mapped to be eager, or if the fetch type is eager by default or not. I think it's okay to eagerly fetch the authorities, because that shouldn't be too big of a strain on our database. Okay, so now we don't get the 401 exception, but it's not loading the view correctly. Is something else going wrong? Okay, yeah. So, as soon as I did that, now there is an issue of a recursive problem, because so we have an infinite loop going back and forward. So the user has a list of authorities, and if you go into authority, it has a user, which if you go back to user, it has authorities, which when you go to authority, it has a user, which has an authority, which has a user, which has an authority, which has a user, which has an authority, which has a user. You get the idea. Infinite loop, and then you get this data bind exception, which is just an infinite, just scroll. It's just the same error message over and over again because it's an infinite loop here. It's a Stack Overflow. And this is the problem with bidirectional relationships with React, is you run into this problem. So what if I get rid of the relationship on the other side? Is that going to cause a problem? What if I get rid of the user mapping over here so that we cut off the relationship from the other side? Let me terminate, and then that means the mapped by is no longer correct because it's not mapped by anything. So we'll just say one-to-many, and then I'll try to reboot and see if this breaks stuff. So it's created, yeah, interesting. It's created like a join table, which is not what I want to do. Whether you want to remove the operation, blah, blah, blah. No. So I don't know how to map it from the parent side of the relationship. Shoot. So first we're going to have to delete that table. That's not what we want. And I think we need to be able to get, shoot. So we have to have, I think there's no other solution here than to roll back and have the bidirectional relationship in place. So let me stop this, save this. Let me drop this table that I created because I don't want to have a many-to-many here. Well, actually, it's not true. Many-to-many is kind of the ideal relationship, but drop table. There. So I just dropped that table. So now this table doesn't exist anymore. And we'll have to deal with the what you call it, infinite loop, right? So this is a JSON mapping, you know, bi-directional endless loop or something. I don't know what words to use. So JPA, bidirectional, one-to-many, JSON endless loop. Exactly. So, okay, JSON ignore. Okay. So we could try that. I think that's going to cause other problems. So let's see. So if we do a JSON ignore on the authorities, what that does is when we are transforming the Java object into a JSON string, in other words, we're kind of stringifying, but from the other direction, we're not stringifying from React. We're stringifying from the Java side to pass back to the React side, the front end. It's not going to put any authorities inside of the user's object. Really, we should do the same thing for password, because we don't want to have the password sent to the front end all the time. That's a bit of a security issue. So let's try that. Come back here, refresh. So stuff loads up now. Great. Now let's come back and bring our front end code back, like so. We'll put in our branch and say submit assignment, and then now, beautiful. So now it hit our breakpoint, right? So basically we got past the problem of the assignment not being able to map stuff out properly. So now if we hover over assignment, you see we have a branch, we have a GitHub URL, which was the data that came from our front end. We have an ID, we have the status, and we have a user assigned to it. Now the problem here is that the user assigned to it probably doesn't have any authorities, right? And it doesn't have a password. So this is where when we say save, we'll have to see what happens. When we save the assignment, we don't want to also save the user. In other words, we don't want to cascade and save the user as well. Let's just have a look and make sure that all it does is update the one table. So let me hit F6. Hopefully there's nothing that crashes. Boom. So update assignment, set branch equal to blah, 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 blah. So that looks good. We'll return the response back, and there's the response on our end here. What you can't see is that we updated the view to be in correlation or in congruence with our assignment that was passed back. So right here, when we saved the data that came back, we reset that back into the assignment variable, which then will be reflected in the view. So the fact that nothing changed here means that everything is good, is basically what I'm getting at. So if we come over here, again, sorry for the white screen, if we select start from assignment, now assignment 2 has a branch and it has a GitHub URL. Okay, let me set that status back to the old status and apply and finish and come back to the front end. But yeah, so now if I refresh, the status changes. Oh, that's interesting. It should have loaded that. How come it didn't load assignment? Load, here's where we load, right? And we set assignment there to assignment data. Interesting. So why didn't that bind on? Oh, right. So I think the value has to be equal to assignment.github URL. There. And then we'll get back to that error. And then here, the value needs to be set to assignment.branch. Cool. So a component is changing an uncontrolled input in the assignment view, likely caused by the value changing from undefined to a defined value, which should not happen. So the value was set to undefined before because the assignment was probably set to undefined because it was here, it was null. So what do you want from me? Do you need an empty object here for that to go away? Let's see. So still undefined to a defined, which should not happen. Decide between using a controlled or uncontrolled input. So the assignment itself, it starts off as empty, but I guess it's almost like the default value needs to be, we need to, get the value from here, right? It's almost like we need to do the fetch, but then I don't think it works like that. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't want to dive into that right now because I think it's okay. Like if I say main2, oh no, it's not okay. So if I try to type in there, it doesn't work. Okay, so how do I do need to fix this. So, it doesn't like me setting the value to be assignment.github URL because I guess this is not properly being tracked. So let me think. How can I have this value set to the property of our sort of domain object here? So how would I word that in the Google? So I would say, React set input value to objects property. Changing input values from an object in React. Sounds about right. Component, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Assuming, oh, they got -1. The colors is an object to begin with, so you get da. So I don't like that answer. React form input object set value property code example. I don't know. Maybe that's what I want. This.state.value. Well, name input this.state.value, but this.state, so value is held in here. So basically, I think what it's complaining about is we need to initialize the object. So the object, since it's an assignment object, we need to have a branch set to nothing, and we need to have a GitHub URL set to nothing, right? Amongst other things, but I think that's what it's complaining about. So if I do that and save it, does the error go away? It does. I still can't type anything though. Assignment.github URL on change, update, assignment prop. Oh, and then I think I need to do one more thing here. I need to actually update the assignment object itself. So this might not actually update the assignment such that it will re-render or repaint the screen, because we're not actually reassigning the value of assignment. So we're not saying assignment equals, something new. We're not doing that, right? And since we're not doing that, it is not repainting the screen when I'm typing, trying to type to update the value. So what we need to do is we sort of have to do this copy thing. So we need to have like, call it new assignment equals, and then we do what's called, we destructure the data from the original assignment object. So this will essentially, for all intents and purposes, create an exact duplicate of the assignment object, and we'll be putting it into new assignment. And then we can say, hey, new assignment prop equals value, right? So we're going to change the new assignment's value. And then we can say, hey, assignment equals new assignment. So we can reassign it. Sorry, not assignment equals. You can't do that. Set assignment to be the new assignment. So this should force it to repaint the screen because we now have a legitimately new object, I think. Let's see. Yeah, main2. And I come here and I can say something to, and then I can say submit assignment. Oops, and that comes in here, and we can, well, might as well double check. So main2 is there, something2 is there, everything else looks okay. Let me get rid of my breakpoint. I hit play, it plays through, no error, we're here, we can refresh the screen. It still says main2, we can switch it to main3, something3, submit assignment, refresh. So there we go. The data is there, the data is back in, locked into where it should be. So a couple changes there, but that's important to understand what I was doing here with respect to creating a copy of the assignment so that I could reset it. I could replace a value back into it. Otherwise, like I said, it doesn't work properly. Now, I would love to see if I can then get rid of branch and GitHub and hit save. No, I still get that error. Okay, so we still need to have some sort of mechanism to not have it go from undefined to something else. We're actually leveraging some state there. So cool. There we go. We have successfully completed our update. So really all that's left is delete. But before we get to delete, I would like to, in the next lesson, get into some refactoring, because we have some bad habits here that we've been doing. We've been copy pasting a lot of this code. I would like to refactor that next. So I look forward to seeing you there. If you enjoy these videos and you want to see that next video, please don't forget to click above me here to subscribe to my channel. Click the bell, and that way you'll get notified for every new video that comes out. I would much appreciate it. And until then, take care of yourself. Happy learning, and bye for now.